students, or afternoon, whenever you're watching my video. This video should be probably between 30 and 40 minutes. The plan today is to talk about a couple of different events. We'll start with something called the Santa Fe Trail, and you can follow along in your fill-in notes if you'd like. Um, and then we're going to move on to really the first people into Oregon territory, and then we'll finish up with the Mormon Trail, which is also westward expansion. So we're kind of skipping around with different activities and different reasons for movement west at this point. But that's, again, part of what leads us to our manifest destiny of controlling everything from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So after this 30 or 40-minute video, however long it lasts, you'll receive a Chapter 12 worksheet. It is a paper worksheet. It is not in Otis. It is not in Google Classroom. You need the paper copy. If you're home, absent, sick, whatever, you need to contact me and I'll figure out a way to get you a copy of that paper worksheet. The worksheet is due the next class period we're together. So if you're my purple kids, this will be due for you on Tuesday. You should, if you're not messing around, be able to finish that worksheet before the end of class after watching this video. So, having said that, if you have any questions, you can write down your questions and we can talk about them when I return to class on Monday or Tuesday. I'm gone today, Friday, for a personal day, so everything's fine. I've just got some things I need to take care of. So, watch the video. If there's questions, jot them down and we'll go over them later. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you outside of what's on the slides. You might want to go back and forth to your study guide and fill things in as we go also. So you have study guide, you have worksheet, you have fill-in notes. Take care of the business. You know the process here. Take care of everything that needs taken care of. So we'll start out today with this slide here, talking about land speculators. Now, first of all, a speculator, whether it's land or buying shares of stock in the stock market or anything, a speculator is a person who buys something, in this instance it's land, in hopes of the value of that land going up and then selling it later. So I always like to use the example of the guy that founded our town. His name was Blair, like Fred, I think, or so. I don't really know what his name was. Who cares? The guy's name was Blair, and he purchased the land in what is today the community of Blair, knowing that it was eventually going to be a town. So when there was nothing here, this Blair guy found out that the railroad was going to cross the river here, and that he would buy the land on the high side of the river. So, we live on top of a hill here in Blair overlooking the river. The other side of the river is pretty flat. That's why when we had a flood years ago, that side of the river, it flooded pretty bad. So he bought up all the land here where he knew the railroad was going to cross because communities often develop here. And some of it has to do with the idea that those trains were typically steam locomotives and there needed to be a town every so many miles, and settlements near rivers were always good. So he was a speculator. Or I can give you a more personal example. In the last 15 years or 20 years of living in Blair, I've bought several houses, fixed them up, hoping that once I fixed them up, they'd be worth more than when I bought them. And then after I get them fixed up, I would sell them and hopefully collect a bit of a profit. So that's speculating. Is there a chance that when you speculate, you might fail? Well, of course there is. Is there a chance that when I bought those houses, the market in housing could have dropped and those houses were worth less than what I paid for them? Of course there is. Is there a chance that Mr. Blair purchases the land on the high side of the river where he believes a community will form, and then the railroad company decides to move where it's going to cross the river? That would have been disastrous for that guy. But instead, he did very, very well. Almost every person that's invested in a business is some sort of a speculator. Mr. Bezos, the guy that runs Amazon, for the first years of running Amazon or operating his company, it was a loser. It lost money. But he kept hoping that it would turn into the gigantic machine that it is today, making him the wealthiest person on the planet by quite a bit. talking billions of dollars, amounts of money that you and I can't even imagine. So speculators existed then, they've always existed, they'll continue to exist. In colonial times, the speculators were those people who that started colonies in hopes of making profits in those colonies. You know, the Joint Stock Company, the Virginia Company that settled at Jamestown, that's a group of speculators hoping to find gold or some sort of riches. Fortunately for them, with no gold or riches, they found tobacco. So um, speculating is a thing that's always been around. So when we talk about the Santa Fe Trail, you'll sort of maybe recognize some of the landmarks on this map. You know, you can see Kansas and part of Oklahoma, and you can see the part of Texas sticking up and headed into Santa Fe, New Mexico. So you can see the trail, the Santa Fe Trail, sort of starts in Independence, Missouri. And Independence, Missouri is kind of a jumping off point for almost all of the trails west, like later the Mormon Trail and the Oregon Trail. They start near Santa Fe. I guess on the river there, start near Independence. Independence is kind of the furthest western point of a lot of existence, of settlement, I guess. So if you're going to start off on a trail, you can buy all of your supplies in Independence or maybe St. Louis, and you head west from there. In this instance, this trail is going to go through the southern Rockies to get to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Many people had already attempted to create a trail from Independence to Santa Fe, but they'd failed. And in Santa Fe, there was quite a settlement there. A lot of people, not necessarily white settlers prospecting or speculating for gold and silver and things like that, but there were a lot of people in that area, and there was a great demand for manufactured goods, products that were common in the East. So anyway, there's a great story, and put yourself in this guy's position and see how you would fail or succeed. This guy named William Becknell, Becknell, takes off from Franklin, Missouri, near Independence, in 1821. He took with him $3,000 worth of stuff. What kind of stuff did he take with him? Flannel cloth, linen cloth, maybe some silk, needles, thread, buttons, shawls for women, knives, axes, tools, spectacles, so like eyeglasses, spectacles, and even a few weapons. So this guy takes with him a little bit of everything. But William Becknell had to take all of the money that he had and pile it all up, scrape together every cent that this guy had, and even ask for money from investors to purchase $3,000 worth of stuff, several wagon loads of stuff, to take off to Santa Fe on a trail that nobody had succeeded in getting past. William Becknell gets a little bit lucky. It takes him 2.5 months to cross this trail from Independence to Santa Fe. 2.5 months to get there. He had to at times think, I'm going to fail, I'm a loser. But he gets there. And when he arrives, he sells all of his $3,000 worth of goods for silver coins, gold coins, wool, and mules so that he could return with these bags of silver and gold. He purchased $3,000 worth of stuff in Franklin, Missouri, and he sold it for $91,000 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And now he knows the path. This guy made a fortune. Now, $91,000 to a Jeff Bezos or a modern investor might not be that much, but $91,000 in 1821 is a fat sum of money. It's a crazy amount of money. So the Santa Fe Trail is now a thing. And the people of Santa Fe are telling William Becknell, come back with more. So there's an insatiable appetite for stuff on the Santa Fe Trail. In fact, that's the trade in 1821. Becknell returned several more times. By 1843, the trade was totaling $450,000 a year. By 1846, so only 3 years later, $1,752,250 worth of stuff Just regular, ordinary manufactured goods was traded on the Santa Fe Trail. And of course, it wasn't all William Becknell at this point. There were others getting involved too. When we see one person having a tremendous amount of success doing something, we're going to copy it. We're going to follow their lead. We're going to do the same thing. So the Santa Fe Trail, hugely profitable, and it's an example of people moving west. And some of these people might find places along the way to create their own settlements or trading posts. So the Santa Fe Trail kind of gets us kickstarted in that westward momentum. Now, if we look at the Oregon Trail, it's going to take off in a different direction. So instead of heading south to Santa Fe, it's going to go north towards Oregon Territory. So picture Oregon. In fact, Oregon Territory was kind of bigger at the time. It was Oregon and Washington and what is today most of the northwestern corner of America. It wasn't really America at the time. But the first people who went west on the Oregon Trail, the first successful, were called missionaries. Now, if you go to church, doesn't matter which church, most of your churches, probably all of your churches, have missionaries that are located in different parts of the world, usually poorer parts of the world. And the ultimate goal of a mission or a missionary is to convert the people that live there into your church's way of belief. So I go to church, and my church has a missionary or a mission in Africa and one in South America that we contribute to. And after lots of people contribute, they might dig a well, they might build a school, they do things for that community that provide a service, and in the process, then the people in the community begin to believe in them. So the first of the missionaries that we're going to take a look at into Oregon Territory were a husband and wife couple named Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. Now, the thing about Marcus and Narcissa Whitman is, yes, they were married, but they didn't necessarily marry out of love. They married out of necessity. For instance, Narcissa wanted to get to Oregon Territory to do this, but no wagon trains would take her west without a husband. So they sort of married because it was convenient for both of them. But when they get to Oregon Territory, they immediately begin sending messages back west, or back east, I'm sorry. And the messages are exaggerated. The messages are like, this place is gorgeous, the soil is perfect, the climate is wonderful, the people are friendly, it's a paradise here. And when people back east start hearing about this paradise of Oregon Territory, they begin to follow Marcus and Narcissa. You don't leave where you're at because you're satisfied with where you're at. You only leave where you're at because the prospects for something better might exist elsewhere. So anyway, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman settle in Oregon Territory in a place on the Walla Walla River near what is today Walla Walla, Washington. And their goal, they settle amongst a group of Native Americans called the Cayuse. The Cayuse weren't Christians. They didn't have one God. They were what we call polytheistic. Most of you sitting in class, if you go to church, are monotheistic. Mono, the prefix mono, means one. If you're monotheistic, that means you believe in one God. If you're polytheistic, that means you believe in many gods or multiple gods. So there's a big difference to the Cayuse Indians, and I might be exaggerating a little bit, but there's a tree god and a bear god and a deer god and a river god. And if you're going to go on a hunt, you say a prayer to the deer god. Dear, dear God, get it, dear, dear God, would you please allow us to kill a deer today to feed our people? Thank you. And then when you kill a deer, you give a prayer back to the deer god. Thank you, dear, dear God, for allowing us to kill one of your creatures. We appreciate. So very, very difficult to get people to believe in one God if they have multiple gods. So these guys have got an uphill climb, and they're really working their tails off. And it doesn't hurt the fact that Marcus Whitman is actually a physician. He's a doctor, so he brings some medical skills with him. As rudimentary as medicine was in 1836, he does have some skills. So they're just beginning to make some headway with the Cayuse Indians, and they're having services, and the Cayuse are kind of curious, so they start sort of coming to some of Marcus's church services, and they're growing friendships in the area, and they're beginning to speak the same language. And in fact, in 1837, Marcus and Narcissa have a baby girl. So Narcissa gives birth to a little baby girl named Alice Clarissa Whitman in 1837. Alice Clarissa Whitman is the first white child born west of the Rocky Mountains, or in Oregon Territory. Uh, Unfortunately for Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, little 2-year-old Alice Clarissa was playing around near the Walla Walla River when she was 2. She fell in and drowned. Yeah, sad story. But the Whitmans were really good people. So over time, they had ended up adopting 11 orphan children from the Cayuse Indians, and that helped to get them the respect of the Indians and kind of get them accepted into the tribe. Unfortunately for them, things are going against them. In 1847, there's enough white people moving into Oregon Territory that they bring with them disease. They bring measles. Measles is an airborne disease, meaning if I have measles and I cough on you, you're going to get measles. Um, and anybody who contracts measles, there's a 90% chance if you have no natural immunity. Now, the white people moving into Oregon Territory had some natural immunity to the measles because, well, white people throughout the ages have always had contracted measles. And if you get the measles, you get sick and you probably survive. But people that had no natural immunity, 90% of them that would catch it would die. And the people that are most likely to die if they contract the disease, just like diseases today, are typically the very, very young or the very, very old. People that are already weak or have other diseases or have weaknesses. So measles epidemic strikes in 1847. In the village of Walla Walla, in the Cayuse village, it kills all of the Indian children and half of the adults. Not the white adults, only the Cayuse adults. So the Cayuse all of a sudden now believe that Dr. Whitman is only healing or only treating the white children because the white children who have some natural immunity to the measles are not dying. Now today, measles are pretty rare. I believe in 2017, the most recent data that I've got, there were 119 cases. In 1960, there were 441,000 cases of measles. So you guys, in 1963, a vaccine was developed for the measles, and I think that you all have been vaccinated probably in the 7th grade for, you got a vaccine called the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, which is German measles. So I've never had measles, and I don't think I personally know anybody that's had measles. The disease is nearly gone because of the vaccine that you get. But the chief of the Cayuse and the remaining Cayuse unfortunately kill Marcus and Narcissa and 12 other settlers. So the Marcus and Narcissa Whitman story ends in horrifying tragedy, but the trip to Oregon Territory is 2,000 miles long. It takes 5 to 6 months, and you have to consider when you're going to leave on this trip. If you leave too early, there's no food for your animals to graze on along the trail. If you leave too late, you could get stuck in the Rocky Mountains in a blizzard and die or starve to death. And there's multiple stories of both of those things happening. If you leave too late, you might not get stuck in a blizzard in the Rockies, but there's no food for your animals because all the wagon trains before you have already eaten everything. So this is really, really tough work. And it doesn't turn out really very well for Marcus and Narcissa. It's a pretty sad story. They're killed by the Cayuse. Now, this story could hit closer to home to some of the people in here. We're going to talk about the Mormon Trail. Now, today we don't necessarily call Mormons Mormons. It's the Church of the Latter-day Saints. That's what they prefer. But the Mormons were called Mormons back in the day. And they kind of created their own religion. And what's interesting and tragic at the same time about this story of the Mormon Trail is these were people that were seeking freedom from religious persecution. Remember, America was founded on the ideas of freedom from religious persecution. The Pilgrims came and settled in North America to escape religious persecution from the Anglicans that were picking on them. So, this is a tragic story that shouldn't have existed in America to begin with. We're supposed to be, the First Amendment of the Constitution says that we can practice whatever religion we choose. So, we're supposed to be tolerant of other religions. But unfortunately for these people, they're going to be picked on and persecuted. So, I'm going to tell you the most basic story that I know to help you understand the growth of the Mormon church. And anybody that's from the Church of Latter-day Saints, you can fix my story. You can talk about it, or we can talk about it when I return. But I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can. The guy that you see on the left with the nice blue eyes, his name is Joseph Smith. Now, Joseph Smith wasn't born Mormon. I can't remember. For some reason, and I might be wrong on this, but for some reason it strikes me that he was born a Methodist. But he was really, really conflicted with things that were going on in the church that he attended. So there were things that he just didn't think were right, and he was confused by them. So Joseph Smith he's questioning his belief system, and he's not sure what he should be believing. And I'm again, simplified story, but Smith basically takes off into the woods to kind of do some self-reflection and some prayer, to think about what he believes as a young man. And he goes off into the woods, and he prays to God, and he meditates, and he just sits there. And then all of a sudden, as he's sitting there, this is a quote from Smith. He says, "I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. When the light rested on me, I saw two personages whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air. One spoke, calling me by name. He said, 'Joseph Smith.' Pointing at the other man, he said, 'This is my beloved son, hear him.' Joseph Smith went into the woods, and God spoke to him and said, 'Listen to my son Jesus.'" And I'm not teaching you religion here. I'm telling you the story of the development of this church. But Joseph Smith speaks with God, and God says, "You got to fix these things. Go back and fix these things." So at the age of 24 years old, Joseph Smith, who's communicating to God through an angel named Moroni, writes a book called the Book of Mormon. It's like a Bible to fix the Bible. It's the Mormon Bible. Directed by God and Jesus and this angel Moroni. So imagine for a minute how difficult it would be to stumble out of the woods and tell all of the people that you know, "Hey, I just spoke to God." You know, if I came to school and said, "Hey guys, I spoke to God and he told me that you all needed to do everything I said," most of you would think I'm nuts. A lot of people thought Joseph Smith was crazy, but he had some followers. So during Smith's life, he grows his church. He starts out with 6 people that are like, "Yeah, I think you're right. I think you could speak to God." 6 people. He builds his church to 26,000 people. So this guy's kicking tail at building a church. But when people find out about their different ways, they've got some different beliefs. Like they live a little bit cleaner lifestyle. They don't believe in maybe swearing, so naughty words are not okay. Or they might believe, many of them, in polygamy. Poly again means many, just like polytheism from the Marcus and Narcissa Whitman story. Polygamy means many wives. So they have some kind of different strange belief systems. They abstain from drinking alcohol, for instance. So that's not okay in their culture of their religion. So anytime we have people that are different or act different or claim to be different, they tend to be the ones that get picked on or bullied. So they start out in New York, they move to Ohio. Everywhere they go, they're getting persecuted or picked on. They end up in Missouri. They're thinking, "Oh, this is far enough west that nobody will mess with us." While they're in Missouri, the governor of Missouri, a goofball named Lilburn Boggs, Lilburn Boggs, passed a law. This is crazy, called the Extermination Order. Lilburn Boggs said that Mormons within the state needed to be exterminated or removed. Exterminated means killed. It's kind of like a miniature, teeny tiny building up to a tiny Holocaust, a removal of a group of people with different beliefs. So eventually, the Mormons get the heck out of Missouri and they end up in a place called Nauvoo, Illinois. I might be saying that wrong, but Nauvoo, Illinois. Smith is growing in popularity, and eventually he's jailed. He's thrown in jail. While he's in jail in 1844, a mob of about 200 men who have painted their faces black with wet gunpowder. Why are they covering their faces? To hide their identity. That's kind of a cowardly thing in and of itself. They attack the jail, they capture Smith, and they kill him. So the leader of the Mormon church is dead. The guy on the right-hand side of the screen, his name is Brigham Young. This guy takes over. Brigham Young, he's now speaking to God, and God says, Brigham Young. I just got to imagine that if God's speaking to you, it's like a booming, thunderous voice. I don't picture God speaking like, hey, Brigham Young. That just seems weird. I think it's a powerful. Maybe I'm wrong. You imagine God speaking the way you want to imagine. Maybe he speaks Spanish. I don't know. Don't really care. But Brigham Young, take your people west. You've got to take off to a place. Head into the middle of a desert. In the middle of a desert, you'll find a great salt lake. Surrounding that salt lake in the middle of the desert, you'll turn it into a paradise. So now Brigham Young, they're being persecuted everywhere they go. They want to head off into a territory where there aren't any people. So they set out on basically, at least across Nebraska, the Oregon Trail, except they stay on the opposite side of the river, the settlers on the Oregon Trail, to avoid persecution. And as they're headed west, when the Oregon Trail shoots off to the north, the Mormon Trail shoots off to the south. And they cross through the southern part of the Rockies into the area of what is today Utah. And these people, the travelers in the Mormon Trail, are typically a little bit poor. Poor is maybe not the right word, but they're, instead of using great big Conestoga wagons like we picture the Oregon Trail settlers using, they're using hand carts. So they got all their stuff in a wheelbarrow. And these guys are just beat up, they're tired, they're just cooked, and they're going into a desert. And I would bet a lot of them are losing faith and confidence in Brigham Young to lead them. And they're in the middle of a desert and they're looking for a lake. There shouldn't be a lake in the middle of the desert. And then one day they come up over a hill and oh my gosh, it's a lake. Well, it is what is today Salt Lake City. It's in the middle of a desert. And the Mormons settle in the area. They're the only ones there. There isn't anybody to pick on them. Now, I should backtrack a little bit. In the winter of 1846, Brigham Young, they're on their way, and they get to what is today a small, teeny tiny settlement called Florence. Well, Florence is actually today North Omaha. So Brigham Young orders the men to stop and set up winter quarters in North O. And he says, build some places. We got to stay warm over the winter. We'll take off in the spring. So in Florence, Nebraska, Florence near Omaha, Nebraska territory, in 1846, they built 700 buildings, dwellings. About 3,500 settlers, so about 5 per dwelling, lived in these things. And then in the spring, they took off on the Oregon Trail to try to settle in their new place. It didn't take long for the Mormons, working their tails off, to build Salt Lake City into an agricultural paradise. So even the lake is a salt lake. Even though it's a salt lake, it's fed by streams and creeks and rivers that are fresh water, and they turn it into an ag paradise by farming and growing crops. And it doesn't take very long before more people head in that direction. So it's amazing to see the growth of the Mormon Church in such a way. And the Mormon Church still exists. The Church of Latter-day Saints still exists. There is a Latter-day Saints church in Blair, and maybe even some of you belong to that church. And again, if you want to retell the story in your own words, I'd be happy to give you the time to do so. But it's very powerful in Utah. Some of you have heard of BYU, the University of BYU. Yeah, that's Brigham Young University. So this guy's a pretty big deal. And Utah has a large number of Mormons. Now, what's great is that the Mormons, even though they were persecuted for practicing their religious beliefs, they don't persecute others for their beliefs. So you don't have to be a Mormon, and you didn't have to be a Mormon to go to Salt Lake City. You just kind of had to agree that you would tolerate Mormon beliefs. So they get along with everyone. It's a great deal, great place to settle. But Brigham Young University, if you go to BYU, I don't know what the percentage is, but I bet it's a significant, probably out of proportional number of students there that are Mormon or Latter-day Saints. But again, you don't have to be Latter-day Saints to attend BYU. So they move around a lot. They're persecuted a lot. The story usually ends fairly well for them. So here's the hand carts that they're pulling along, and imagine the difficulty in doing that compared to using a horse and wagon. And you can see the Mormon Trail here, about here where the Oregon Trail would head north. The Mormon Trail heads down toward the Great Salt Lake in Utah, not as far south as you might think. And then on this map, at one point, the Mormons proposed that they build their own state. It's gigantic, the dotted line here, called Deseret. But if we look at the orange part in here, not the dotted part, the orange part today, if you were to go into anywhere in this area, a significant proportion of the population are Latter-day Saints. They belong to that specific religion. So it doesn't mean it doesn't exist here and here and here, and of course Blair. Latter-day Saints are all over the country. It's a pretty big church, but kind of cool to think about. But we see leader of the Latter-day Saints, president of the church for almost 30 years. They called him the Mormon Moses. If you know the story of Moses, he led his people to freedom. He was the one, that grew up as a Methodist and switched over to Latter-day Saints. It's believed, and some of this may or may not be true, but the Utah church records say that Brigham Young had 27 wives and 56 kids. Some say that he had 55 wives and 56 kids with 16 of those wives. Look at those beauties. Polygamy, at one point in 1890, it's estimated that about 20% of Mormons, Latter-day Saints, practiced polygamy. The religion itself officially terminated the practice in 1890, and it's estimated that in 1998, so 20 years ago, about 1.4% of Latter-day Saints were actually polygamous. So it's really pretty rare. The only time you really ever see or hear of it is if you watch that show, Sister Wives. I think that's base. I've never actually watched it, but I think that's the base of it. Here's Smith's family, so you can see lots of children. I don't know who this guy is, but he looks like he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 wives and a whole boatload of kids. So that's an example of polygamy. Beautiful architecture in their buildings, huge cathedrals in Salt Lake City and in Novo, Illinois. And we'll continue there with discussion of the rest of our Manifest Destiny in our next class meeting. So I think I didn't lie to you, and I think I stuck to right around 30 minutes in this lesson. So we went over the Santa Fe Trail and speculators making money, finding ways to make money, the Oregon Trail and the beginnings of the Oregon Trail with missionaries like Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, and we finished it up talking about the Church of Latter-day Saints or the Mormon Church, and a very, very basic description of the beginnings of that religion and why and when and where their movement was, which also spurred along more movement as word spread that the area around Salt Lake City was a really nice place to be. So we'll conclude there. You should be getting a worksheet now. Get that worksheet done for me before we meet again, please. Don't use each other, no copying, no cheating. You guys have a great day.